Right, good morning everybody, and thank you for attending this executive, sorry I'm going blank, EAP for Connected Communities. Can I remind members to keep their phones on silent or switch them off, and turn the sound off on their computers as well. And moving straight into the first item, apologies for absence, David.
Thank you very much, Chair. We've had apologies from Councillor Richard Lavelle, Councillor Kelly Watts, Councillor Bert Jackson and Councillor Melanie Coleman.
Thank you. Item 2, declarations of interest. Any declarations of interest of the items on the agenda? Item 3, minutes of the meeting held on the 19th of April 2024. Since I was probably the only person there, is everybody else happy to sign them as a true record of what went on?
Through you, Chair. You weren't, Councillor Brackenbury provided apologies. It was just the 3 members at the last one.
I think it was the meeting beforehand. So, but no, you did give apologies.
I will tweak that before they. But yeah, I reviewed the footage, and there was only.
Right, we can always go back and we can go back and look on YouTube to see whether people were or weren't there. But okay, so I will sign them as a true record of what I remember of the meeting. Okay, moving on to items for discussion, which is item 4, which is feedback on the updated North Northamptonshire Council comments, compliments and complaints policy. And Simon Mills is going to introduce that.
Good morning. Thank you, Chair, and good morning, members. This is to go through the updates to the complaints and compliments and comments policy. This goes hand in hand with the recently updated and created unacceptable customer behaviour and remedy policies, which we brought to this said committee back in February as well. This report has brought together a number of statutory changes as well as some advisory changes from the Housing Ombudsman as well as the LGSO, and they've been incorporated into a review of the existing policy to ensure that we reflect best practice and statutory guidance, and also to enable us to bring together a much more reflective policy to support our officers as well. Okay, so what I'm going to do is just going to go through the top lines around some of the key changes and the journey that's kind of led us to this point, and where we would look into what we're going to be doing in terms of implementing it going forward. So the current policy was drafted by the Future North Hants project team for implementation when the new Unitary Council was created and signed off by the Shadow Executive. The review is now required to ensure, as I say, the policy reflects North Northamptonshire Council's working practices and experiences and embodies the values of the Council. The statutory changes follow an external joint consultation with the Local Government and Social Care Ombudsman, referred to in the report as the LGSCO, and the Housing Ombudsman Service, referred to the report as HOS, and they've also been incorporated into the policy. So what we're looking for today is for some feedback and any consideration you want to put into this ahead of the exec briefing next week, and then the policy going to executive on the 11th of July. So recommendations for bringing this forward today is that we have to incorporate these new legislation changes, but we're also looking at how the Council embraces feedback, positive and negative, and aspires to learn and shape service provisions off the back of it. A robust policy should provide clarity on the themes of feedback and how they will be recorded and or acted on, aiding the development of a positive complaint and learning culture. The revision of this policy also links in, as I say, the remedy policy and updated unacceptable customer behaviour policy, and this ensures that Council has a consistent approach when handling feedback and managing different types of interactions, as well as equipping officers with consistent and reliable guidance. There are alternative options that could be considered, and the only other option for this is to not revise and continue operating under the policy that we currently have since Veston Day. Therefore, that would delay the Council's adoption of a new statutory practice as set out by the HOS and LGSO guidance. So in terms of the background effect of all this, we provide services to over 500,000 customers each year across a wide area and varying demographics. It's important that customers can give the Council feedback via a method that meets their needs and is accessible. The complaint handling codes as set out by the LGSO and the HOS enables councils to adopt a consistent and streamlined approach, giving customers a platform on which to provide their feedback and seek clarity. It is both advisable and expected to have a policy that is clear on the types of feedback and how poor experiences can be highlighted and acted on to prevent reoccurrence. So in the winter last year, both of those bodies held a joint consultation with local authorities to gather feedback on changes to the complaint handling codes. The outcome of that consultation was communicated to local authorities back in February this year, with each recognised body publishing complaint handling codes, and they were attached to the report in Appendix B and C. This was a joint consultation to see whether a single joint code could be adopted. The outcome, after considering the feedback from the local authorities, was to remain separate, but have an aligned and share the approach in key areas around those separate codes, most prominently the complaint response times and the oversight. The LGSCO complaint handling code is considered good practice and is recognised as guidance to be adopted. They'll start using this as the code as part of its processes from April the 1st, 2026, giving councils time and opportunity to adopt the code and the engagement of key officers and services. Early adoption is of course encouraged, and we're given the guidance to do so as soon as we can. The HOS complaint handling code became statutory on the 1st of April this year, and as a landlord, the council is legally obliged to follow it. Complaint handling for adult social care and children's services fall under separate governance and legislation, and this is outlined in the policy document itself underneath Appendix 1 and Appendix 2. The policy that's been put forward today has been reviewed by the customer experience team and shared with key stakeholders to ensure a robust consideration of engagement. And the policy itself will inform consistent management of feedback and proactive steps to learn from the feedback given and the benefits in real time. Now, in addition to the report that isn't included in the cover for this committee, is that as part of the changes to the Housing Ombudsman from the 1st of April, there was a stipulation that a self-assessment is carried out by the service to see how those changes have been implemented, and for them to also look at opportunities around embedding that process as they go through the financial year. That is due to be completed and submitted to the Ombudsman by the 30th of June, and that has now been done and can be forwarded as part of this for your review as well. It highlights a number of things that we are bringing together along with the joint complaints process to enable consistency, and it also gives the housing service something to work off as they go through the rest of the financial year around some of its key milestones around how they're going to be handling tenant feedback and how they're going to be acting on the feedback they receive. At this point, I'm just going to pause to see if there's any questions. I'm just conscious I've gone through quite a bit around the legislation and the changes there.
Members, any comments?
I don't have any questions, Chair. It makes sense to adopt the new policy. I think we recommended it,
I don't know. I think your microphone stopped working. Do you want to grab the microphone to your left?
I've got no questions. I think it makes sense to adopt the policy. I don't know if this EAP recommends that to the exec, but
Yep.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
Councillor
thank you,
Jones.
Chair. I think, yeah, I agree. I think we should adopt the policy. I think it's important. We've got to deal with complaints properly. My only concern is to make sure that whatever we put in here and recommend to the executive is followed up to the letter, because most of the complaints I get from local residents are the fact that they complain about something and they don't get an answer. You know, they have to chase me, they ring me up and say, I've still heard nothing, Councillor Jelly. And I think, it's important, if we're going to put this in place, that we stick to these timescales, because, I'll give you, for example, I've had a guy in Rossville chasing me for the last 3 months for his sticker for his green bin. He's paid for it over 3 months ago, and he still hasn't got it, and he can't get an answer from the council. So I think it's important that, if somebody's got a complaint, it's dealt with properly and in a timely fashion. So, other than that, I think, yes, we should have this process in place to deal with complaints properly. So.
Okay. On that specific one, Councillor Jelly, if you want to forward that on to either myself or Simon, we'll expedite it and make sure that it is dealt with immediately. Okay. Do you want to carry on, Simon?
Thank you. Okay, so I'll just give a bit more detail around some of the criteria changes then within the two codes and how that's then reflected in the policy. So the key changes for both handling codes were to define a universal definition of what a complaint is, providing easy access to the complaints procedure and ensuring residents are aware of it, including their right to access the Ombudsman services. The structure of the complaints procedure, so that's making sure that only dictates 2 stages and clear times and for responses are set out. Ensuring fairness in complaint handling with a resident-focused process. Taking action to put things right and appropriate remedies. Creating a positive complaint handling culture through continuous learning and improvement. Demonstrating learning in annual reports and annual self-assessment against the codes of practice. So as I mentioned around the Housing Ombudsman stipulating that mandatory requirements, it's also been adopted with the LGSO that we also do a self-assessment as well. So that you can start to see where they've mirrored their approach to both ways of handling complaints. So in the report itself, I've put a table in just to show where the current SLAs that we have and what the changes are going forward. So the 2 areas that are primarily affected are the acknowledgements and the stage 1 response time. So at the moment we acknowledge within 3 working days and we're going to be changing that to 5 working days. The reason for doing that is it's more consistent with our corporate approach to customer contact. So email responses have a similar process. It just means that we're aligning rather than having differentiations between which response gets which. And the stage 1 response goes from 20 working days down to a 10 working day response. There's no changes to stage 2 responses at this point. The reduction in working days for stage 1 complaints will have an impact on the services and the way they operate, particularly the place in the Commonly and Adults Health and Partnership Directorates. In 23-24, North Northampton Council handled just over 2,300 stage 1 complaints and 68 stage 2 complaints, which is just a total underneath 2,400. Of those, 55% were responded to with the existing published SLA of 20 days. Clear Engagement Plan Support Network is being developed as casework is moved onto a digital system. The council uses a supplier called PlaceCube, which will store all case types from September of this year. Officers will be engaged on the importance and value of customer feedback and the benefits of tracking learnings and making proactive changes to the way services are delivered, reducing reoccurrences of poor service. And then we'll look at the how it's changed underneath the Housing Ombudsman Service Complaint Handling Code. The table is also been included in the report, which is the same. We can see at the moment the acknowledgement is 3 working days, and the stage 1 response is 20 working days. And again, that will be changed into 5 working days for the acknowledgement and 10 working days for the response. In terms of other options, we did consider whether the current policy could be retained, and it was determined that a revision provides the opportunity to ensure the policy is reflective of best practice and the experiences and values of the council, as well as meeting our statutory requirements as a landlord. So just to sort of bring back to around some of the points that members have raised so far about how we put this into practice. Any feedback we take today will be incorporated into the final report that goes through to exec on the 11th, along with the draft policy, with the aim of then that being adopted and published, which will then give that clear guidance within those requirements going forward. We are putting together at the moment an engagement and training rollout for all services. So we're talking about going onto a case management system. So having these 3 policies now reviewed, created and revised, they go hand in hand with that launch of that case management system, which gives us an opportunity to really reset the way in which we currently operate and the way in which we change that way of working going forward. And we've been working with our project manager and our change engagement managers to bring a really good engagement pack together. And this will then be looking at how we can then, within our team, support officers to, with that guidance and support, and to help bed in that new way of working as we approach September 2024. The Housing Ombudsman Code has been statutory since this year, so the service has already been working alongside that updated code, which again is why we've included the self-assessment, which is due to be submitted by the end of next week. So again, I'll just pause to see if there's any questions.
Councillor Brackenbury.
Thank you. I think it's good that the response times are being reduced. My only question is, you said social care, 55% of complaints, stage 1, were responded to in 20 days. It's a big ask reducing that to 10. Are you confident that a new case management system and staff training will enable that to happen quite smoothly?
Thank you. It is a very important question, and I think the case management system itself is not going to solve all those problems. It's certainly going to be an enabler to ensure we have a much more efficient and effective one version of the truth, which means that we then can free up our officers' time to really support the teams in terms of their case management. So, there's no denying the fact that those high volume areas are in receipt of a lot of case management work, and it could be the fact that they're coming through 3 different themes because of the inaction on one. So there could be duplication as a consequence of that. But we need to be relinquishing that resource to enable them to support them through that casework. It's going to be something it's going to take time to embed, which is why we're approaching it from an engagement perspective as far, rather than just saying, here's a new system, this is how it works, carry on. We need to really go back to the drawing board and re-engage on how the culture of complaint handling is within the organisation, and to support our officers to understand the importance that needs to be attached to it, and also ensuring that they are empowered to handle those lines of inquiry in a timely manner to help reduce the dissatisfaction within our customer base.
Can I just make a comment? Just to reassure that social care, the process, it is a different process. It's attached at the appendices. So you will find that some of the elements that we're outlining to you as key changes in this policy, they won't apply the same. Adult social care is under a different process.
Okay, the one thing it flags up to me is this acknowledgement period. Why does it need 5 working days to acknowledge an issue? From a member point of view, I think that's the most frustrating point, because you put in an inquiry, and if you've got to wait 5 working days before you actually even be told that that inquiry was successful and your email just hasn't disappeared into the ether, is probably more frustrating than having to wait 10 working days for a whole answer. So could you clarify that? Because I think that is one of the biggest bugbears that I'm seeing.
Thank you, Chair. So, yes, the reason for aligning it with the code around the acknowledgement of logging in and signing a complaint is at the moment there are a lot of variables that can lead to a delay in that. So we will always have peaks and troughs around the volume of feedback coming in, whether that's through a complaint process, an MP or member process. Now, in terms of resourcing that in the back office, in terms of the available resource to handle and assign those caseworks, we have a benchmark of what that is. But if you were to try and track that against those peaks in volume, you'd have to really increase the resource there to assign it to. And where we are training up some of our contact centre teams to relieve some of that pressure, inadvertently what that's doing is taking away those colleagues at a peak time when customers are calling in to then go and do that casework assignment as well. So there are particular pinch points throughout a year when it's really challenging to meet that 3-day SLA because of how the team is resourced. It also accounts for the fact as well that when a complaint comes through, the team are really skilled to ensure it gets allocated to the team the first time and the right time. But equally, some of those complaints can be quite complex, and it can go to a service, and actually it's not the right service that it needs to go to. So it also allows for the element of if it comes back for us to say, no, it's not us, we can then go and find the right service, but also give them the appropriate time to actually fully investigate that theme of complaint and respond to the customer in that time window. Otherwise, if we reduce the acknowledgement part, we are eating into that time for the officers to do a really robust investigation into that complaint. And considering we're going from 20 days down to 10 days, we need to make sure that they do have that full time window in which to thoroughly investigate. Because, if it's a really specialist service and the resilience base within the service is down to a very small percentage of our officers who can answer that complaint and they're on leave, it starts to really eat into that time window. So that's one of the reasons for introducing that, as well as also it being the best practice as an organisation. Also gives us a bit of resilience to enable that. The good news is when it comes to our 3-day SLA at the moment, we're used to working to that. So we'd be in a position where actually we're over delivering in this sense, but given that little bit of respite for those peak times when they do come through, because they inevitably do happen, unfortunately.
Yeah, I must admit, from my point of view, what I would like to have seen would be a potential of if somebody emails in an issue, whether it be a complaint, inquiry, or whatever, they are informed virtually immediately by return. Your complaint, your inquiry has been received and is being handled in the right way. And then to see that 5 working days become part of the 10, so an SLA of 15 working days in total to actually get the inquiry handled, but that whoever's the inquirer is actually receiving an instantaneous response saying, thank you very much, we've received it, and then the process starts. Now, that process might take 5 days to get that inquiry to the right place to actually handle it, but that should be part of the process. And doing that, I think, and making the SLA 15 days in total, so that more easier ones can be handled quickly, because they're it's the perception of the inquirer, because the perception of the inquirer is, oh well, I fired in a complaint and I haven't heard anything. 5 days later, yes, I've heard something, and then we start that. Whereas I think if the perception of the inquirer is, they've received my complaint, they're putting it in the right place, and then that.
Yeah, I think it's what we could probably do is in the report itself, and the policy is just really clear on it. The moment that someone logs a complaint, they will have an acknowledgement that we've received it. So when we're talking about acknowledgement around the code, this is more around your case has now been allocated to a case officer, and this is who it is, and this is when to expect a response. So there's always going to be that automatic acknowledgement that your complaint has reached us. That's existing practice now, and it will be within the new case management system. This is more around the fact of we are now formally acknowledging your complaint. We have assigned it to this officer. This is the response time window for this officer to give you that outcome. So we can reflect that to be built into the report, so it's really clear on that. But the guidance itself is quite clear around it's about that triaging of 5 days, and then this response has to be within 10 days. So I guess what you're saying there, it's around the 15-day SLA. That's a way of it being broken down, but we have to break it down into that because that's the guidance in which we're governed on.
Yep.
But reassurance that within the existing process and the new process, the customer will know that they have logged it. This is just our formal acknowledgement at that point within that 5 days that we've now actually assigned it to somebody, and this is who it is. And this is they're also signposting that acknowledgement as well about the relevant ombudsman around their complaint handling, so that the customers can also then look at the code and see where we are aligned with those codes as well. So that's that formal acknowledgement process itself.
Okay. Councillor Brackenbury.
Sorry, that explanation from Simon actually asked, answered what I was going to the query, because I agree it's good to know that your email actually got to the right person, and presumably that 5 days ensures that it's allocated to the right, and it is actually a proper complaint and not a spurious one, because I'm sure sometimes complaints are not genuine complaints.
It's a very good point, because what we generally have when we come through that process is there's almost this, Mandy, you might be able to give some further context on this, but there's this triaging door. It's not simply saying, right, that's the customer said X needs to go here and we log it, and we don't do any further diving into what it is. If it's a service request, we will look at actually turning that around and getting that acted on, because it's not right that it should then sit for 10 days for a customer to get told, oh, we've done this. But actually, if it's something we can see that just needs to be logged here and now, like a missed bin, we'll do that and we'll close that down effective immediately. But our passive to Amanda, we might just give a bit more reassurance around how that triaging process works.
Yeah, well, there's no doubt there's room for improvement in making sure our customers understand the difference between raising a complaint and making a service request. And I think that's not just our customers. Sometimes our members don't quite know what that line is either. So we're definitely going to work to make our website more clear with that information. But there's always going to be an aspect of service requests that come through as complaints. And we, as Simon explained, our team will have to triage and determine they are service requests. Then, it's a very similar process. It is assigned to the service as a service request to pick up. Obviously, services, they deliver services within different timescales depending on what the service is. So those service requests will be dealt with within those services timescales. But at least the customer at that point will be aware that it was a service request and treated as such.
Thank you.
And again, I think just to offer some reassurance, within the complaints policy itself, we've done some work at the front of that policy to define the different themes of feedback. So it's, we're talking more broadly around the complaints, because that's what drives the volume of case management that we get into the council. But the policy itself is around compliments, comments and complaints. So we've been really defined around what those types of feedback are and what would constitute that type of feedback, and how we will handle those types of feedback at the front of the policy before we've then gone into, if you do go down this avenue, this is how it will work and this is how we will respond. Because it's important that customers are also aware that it's about feedback in general, as opposed to it being, every bit of feedback has to be a complaint. The nature of the services we provide means that we do handle predominantly a high volume of complaints, but there are various strands that come off that as well. Okay, so just in terms of any of the final parts of the report, just to cover off, so we've looked at in terms of the financial and transformation points. There are no resources or financial implications arising from the proposals and the policy. We've had our finance team oversee it, and they've looked alongside this policy, alongside the remedy policy, which we brought to this to the same committee back in February, and they also agree with the approach, those two policies working hand in hand. It's just going through the final stages of our legal consultation at the moment, but considering the roadmap for the previous two policies, we're not expecting anything dramatically to impact this coming out at the end of it as well. And so there hasn't been any significant risks identified from doing so. And where we have been talking about the different types of feedback and how they can be given back to the council, we also address in a paragraph around the equality impact within the policy itself what unacceptable behaviour is, because when you are handling types of feedback and people may feel particularly grieved about a situation, sometimes that can then transcend into unacceptable behaviour, and we need to also make sure that we are addressing that at the same time and consistently, and not inadvertently putting customers into a position where they can't actually raise their feedback because of an inconsistent approach to how it's handled. And in terms of the consultation I mentioned, it was done externally with the LGSO and the HOSBAC in the winter of last year. And we have taken consultation with our internal colleagues as well as our external partners. So the Children's Services is provided on behalf of WNC. So we've engaged with the complaints team over at WNC to ensure that the appendix included in the policy is up to date and reflective of that best work and practice as well. And just going back to that point around the adult social care, we've taken into account the governance under local authority, social services and National Health Service complaints, which is the regulations brought under 2009 and the Care Act of 2014. Now, just to reassure members as well, the appendix does talk about different timeframes on that. Our adult social care team have a really good process in place for handling complaints, and wherever possible, they actually are working towards our corporate timeframes for enacting those responses. They've got a really good process in place in terms of that handling of a complaint and working with customers who do fall underneath that service. So in terms of highlighting good practice, they do demonstrate it really well. And even with those differences around the governance changes and the complexities of those complaints, customers do receive a good outcome from that. Okay, so that was everything I had really to go through. So I'm just going to again open the floor to any further comments or feedback ahead of us taking this to the exec briefing next week and then to the exec on the 11th of July.
Any further comments? No? Okay.
No, I knew that we...
Thank you very much. So I think we made a couple of comments and things to be noted. And really, it's more clarification than anything else that I think we've worked on. Okay, thank you very much, Simon. Moving on in the agenda, the next item on the agenda is our executive forward plan. Guy isn't here to comment on that. I must admit the forward plan for the next couple of months is quite light as far as the Connected Communities part goes. Looking at items for this EAP to discuss, I don't know whether there's any items that members want to suggest. I'm probably going to have a few discussions with Guy and probably Simon as well on ideas going forward.
A couple of things on the horizon, if it would be helpful for me to mention those.
Yes, sure, Simon.
So hoping to get this ahead sort of mid-July, because I'm on some leave between then and the paper's being presented for August, so going to be done in a timely manner, David. But we're looking at potentially bringing to this group a paper on the customer experience strategy. I think it'd be really good now that I've had some time with David, our head of digital, to look at a structure of a strategy, which is a joint approach with customer experience and a digital framework. We've started to sketch out what those parameters look like, but I think it'd be really good to get some insight and some input from members on that, ahead of us then doing some working groups with our customer base, because it's a customer experience policy, so therefore strategy, it should therefore be engaged with as much of the public as possible. And then also looking at our outreach programme, which is where at the moment we have 3 outreach surgeries within the former Kettering council area, and we're looking at making that a more consistent approach across the whole of North Northants. So having an outreach presence in all our localities, which will reflect where our local area partnerships, so our LAPs, are working at the moment. So there's 7 recognised LAPs within North Northants, and we are already at the moment working with those colleagues and joining certain initiatives as we speak on to this week to try and establish those links. So again, if that's not an August paper, it will certainly be the next one where we sort of bring together what that strategy looks like and how we're doing that outreach. And the idea of that programme is to ensure that we know that we have these main contact channels coming into the service, but we equally have people that we're not interacting with, and sometimes that means we need to actually go to them. So it's looking at where those services are operating from, where there's footfall, and making sure that we are there and available to be able to appropriately signpost and do some early prevention and intervention work with those customers. Because at the moment, the current model where we are sitting in libraries, we're waiting for people to come to us, and that isn't always the right approach. We're not seeing that footfall that we would be better off doing across the whole of the authority. So again, a really important bit of work, one I'm really passionate about. So hopefully we can get something to that, if not in August, definitely for the next one as well.
Councillor Brackenbury.
I look forward to seeing that, particularly, it'd be really important, particularly for the rural areas in North Northants.
Yeah, definitely. If say, for one to answer where the LAPS approach, there's 2 local area partnerships, sorts of clusters in each former area, with the exception of Corby, which has 1. But it's looking at really how we can reach those areas. So, for example, we've done a pilot in Ondle recently. We've been the most northern part of the area, about how we can do an outreach there. So we're trying to explore those options and how we can do it. And I think it's just making sure if we do have a place for that within the service, it's doing the right thing and we're in the right place. And being really open about that, we might have to do a session where we do 3 and look at the footfall and then revise it and go again. But the approach and the strategy is to ensure that we're out there and we're accessible.
Okay. Any other comments? Okay. Well, there being no other items on the agenda, I